Welcome to the voices of transparency and excellence. We're not pivoting, the world is spinning like a top. Let's stop, figure things out, get some answers. Come with us on this ride. Warm regards, Rick and Judi.
Welcome to our podcast series where we address crucial topics impacting our campus and community. I'm Rick Gatteau, and my co-host Judi Clarke is on assignment today. Today we're going to talk about the new federal dietary guidelines issued by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Agriculture Secretary Brook of the Trump administration. And we're so pleased to be joined by Josephine Connolly-Schoonen. She is the Executive Director of the Nutrition Division, Director of Graduate Nutrition Programs, and a clinical professor in the Renaissance School of Medicine here at Stony Brook University. So grateful to have you join us, Jo.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So given that beginning point in terms of the federal dietary guidelines, why don't we start there today and tell us a bit about what are the new guidelines?
So the dietary guidelines are published about every 5 years, and they're a culmination of the recent evidence on how food impacts health. They're typically based on the Dietary Guidelines for Americans Committee that every year prior to those guidelines coming out submit a report. This year, the committee's report and the actual guidelines aren't 100% in alignment, we'll say. But the guidelines, as they are published now, will be used, as they are always, to guide federally funded nutrition programs like school lunch and breakfast programs, supplemental food programs for women, infant, and children, and feeding programs for seniors or geriatric patients in the country. So they do have a significant impact on what is provided through those federally funded programs.
And what are some of the specific changes? I know we always talk about the food pyramid. What has changed in the food pyramid?
So they've changed the shape, right? They flipped it. But even more importantly than that is there's a real big focus, especially in the diagram, on red meat and dairy products, full-fat dairy products, which is definitely different. Not so much in the graphic, but in the text, they do, to their credit, call out the problems with ultra-processed foods and really encourage Americans to avoid those foods.
Mm-hmm. And what about just basics around grains, fruits, and vegetables? What are other things that are the same or different in the new guidelines?
So vegetables and fruits are still highlighted in the graphic on the upper right corner, and they are called out in the text as well. However, to me, my professional opinion is they missed an opportunity to really highlight vegetables as a key component and plant-based foods as a really, really key component to a healthy style of eating.
When you first learned of the new guidelines, right, what was your reaction given? And please share a bit about your tremendous career and experience in this area.
Sure. So, just to be fair, dietary guidelines have been influenced by industry for as far back as I've been in practice, which is a long time. So that is still true today, but it's not different. I am concerned, though, about the focus on red meat and dairy because the literature has evolved in terms of red meat and even saturated fats, but we still know for sure that a plant-based diet, a primarily plant-based diet with some lean red meats, if people choose, or certainly poultry and fish, is okay. But the really strong emphasis on red meat and whole-fat dairy is really concerning to me.
So I'll ask a very straightforward question. Why do you think those guidelines have changed in such a way to emphasize eating red meat, for example?
So to some effect, red meat and saturated fat has been overly vilified. So there is some correction, and that's okay. Nutrition evolves, science evolves. We learn more about physiology and markers of inflammation. We also learn more about components of the diet. So early on, well, in the 70s, 80s, let's say, some attributes to saturated fat, some negative attributes to saturated fat were probably really from hydrogenated fats, like margarines, think of that. So there's been some distillation of those effects. So as I said, animal protein, especially chicken and fish, have a place in a healthy diet. Red meat can to a very small extent. And we do want to be careful about how much protein we advocate for and the source, because animal proteins can have an impact on the gut microbiome. And I'm sure we're all reading more and more about the gut microbiome. We are basically vehicles to take our microbes around. There are more microbial cells in and on us than our own cells. So fostering a healthy gut microbiome is really key to health, and plant foods do that in a much better way than animal foods.
I'm curious, to what degree do you think federal guidelines, because again, you mentioned that they're reviewed every 5 years. What do you think is the knowledge base of the average American around these guidelines?
So I don't think many people really are consciously aware of the dietary guidelines. It does impact, though, what kids learn in school about nutrition and in a health or bio class, perhaps. So there is that impact, but I don't think people are very aware of the guidelines per se. However, social media now and how we get our news and information has changed over the years. And I think there's been a bit of a buzz on social media about the dietary guidelines, so people may be hearing about them more. I don't know if people know it by name, but I think people do pay attention in terms of what's being promoted for health in terms of food, but who they're paying attention to can be concerning.
And I know you mentioned earlier that this also influences what government-funded programs, for example, I'm assuming a free or reduced lunch program in elementary, high school. Does that then directly influence what's served, for example, in the cafeteria?
It can.
And in what way is so? Would red meat, for example, maybe had not been served, it could be served in those spaces?
So red meat, probably not so much because of the cost. But for example, we have, to a large extent, de-emphasized whole milk in schools. But what is called out in the guidelines, sweetened milk, is still allowed in schools, like chocolate milk. And that might change. You might see whole milk back and chocolate milk out.
Interesting. Okay. I did like my chocolate milk back in the day. That Nestle's quick sometimes. It's quite good. Let's broaden this a bit to talk more broadly about just the issues around obesity. So there was a recent study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in late January that said that 47%, or nearly half of adults in America, will be obese within 10 years. Just curious your reaction to that, and how does food ultimately play a role in the obesity, what I would then view those numbers as being an epidemic?
Yeah, it's hugely concerning, like really, really concerning. I believe before COVID, we started to make some traction in at least stabilizing the rates of obesity and decreasing the increase in the rates of obesity. With COVID, we saw such an increase in DoorDash and like all these mechanisms to bring food to your home and process, really poor quality nutrition food. So, I think that has played a huge role in losing that progress we made. So this increase in obesity is hugely concerning because obesity fuels inflammation in our bodies, and inflammation fuels every chronic illness, every single one of them, including cognitive decline.
Can you share, when I go to my annual physical and we talk about going to scale in your weight, can you talk about that relative to then a BMI and what the differences are? Because I'm still never quite understanding what the BMI really means.
Sure. So body mass index, or BMI, is a relative measure of your weight to your height. So it's weight in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. So it's a proxy for body composition. So what's really important is your weight, but also what percentage of your weight is body fat versus muscle. We have ways of measuring that, but they're not so convenient, although there are increasing technology or better technology that allows us to do that quicker in the clinic, but not readily available right now. So we use body mass index as a proxy for body composition, which you can imagine if you're an athlete and you work out a lot and you have a large muscle mass that drives up your weight, that's going to drive up your body mass index, but it's not making you unhealthy. Just suffice it to say that for the vast majority of people, their excess weight is not from muscle. For some it is, but those people that work out know that. And if you do a lot of strength training, you know that. So it's a proxy for body fat and body composition.
Helpful, thank you. What, in terms of diet, let's talk about now issues around obesity. We have a new dietary recommendations. What as an average American, what would you recommend in terms of diets that people opt into? Pros and cons of different diets that maybe the clients you work with. What are recommendations in the diet space?
So we need to just forget names of all these different diets, right? And when we get new guidelines, food industry then kind of takes over. So, for example, I might be straying a little from your question, but for example, when we were promoting or the guidelines were really on reducing fat, food industry comes in and makes fat-free products with all these synthetic ingredients that simulate the mouthfeel of fat, etc. And then that becomes problematic, right? Because it's these ultra-processed foods that are highly problematic. So we want to just kind of tune out the names of diets and tune out food industry and any marketing, any descriptors on food packages. And you really want to do the following. You want to optimize your vegetable intake. You want at least 3 cups of vegetables a day. Every meal should include vegetables. Even breakfast, you can often add some vegetables. Then we can add some starches, grains and starches. And then think about adding some protein. So a number you hear a lot is 30 grams of protein per meal. You do not need 30 grams of protein per meal. And not all of that protein is going to come from obvious protein foods like eggs or chicken or fish or even beans. Protein accumulates from your vegetables and your grain and starches. So when I counsel people, when I make up their nutrition therapy plan, I'm almost always decreasing the amount of protein on their plate because most people overeat protein. They also overeat calories. So Americans do not have to worry about getting enough protein. We do get enough protein. It's very, very rare. It has to be somebody that has some medical issue that's preventing them or making it hard for them to get enough protein.
What about issues around portion size, though? I wonder to what degree that contributes, because I often find that if you go to a restaurant, it's whatever's on your plate, you're going to eat the whole thing. And I wonder if how much that is a contributing factor.
So in restaurants, you'll see the larger portions are the cheaper foods, right? So it's going to be the French fries, the pasta, the rice, the mashed potatoes, things like that, because that's cheap. So they'll make those portions really big. So people try, and they'll be like, oh, Josephine, I only have half when I go out to eat. I'm like, oh, that's fabulous, but you need to have like a quarter of what they serve you. And
You
use
really disappointed your friends and clients. Yes, right.
So you can use your hands as a guide. So if you make a fist, that should be the portion of your starchy foods.
Great.
If you look at the palm of your hand, that should be the amount of protein that you have. And then vegetables should take up more than half of your plate. And then fats, if you think about the well that would be created in your thumbprint, that would be the amount of healthy fats you should have.
What about fish in a diet?
Fish is excellent. We just need to be a little cautious of the large fish that have a long lifespan and they accumulate mercury in the water. So your large fish you want to be careful with. Like sardines are great. So, fish 2 or 3 times a week is a good choice, a very good choice.
And let's talk a bit about just eating throughout the day, because I've read many things about, is it better to eat 3 square meals? Is it better to eat small amounts throughout the course of the day? What's the best advice in terms of your daily intake over a span of a day?
Okay. So the, quick answer is about 3 to 4 times a day. However, I would always say use intuitive eating. So be very mindful of when you are physiologically hungry, not hungry in your mind or your mental state, but physiologically in your gut hungry. And we should eat when we're hungry very slowly. You should chew each bite 10 times. Put your fork down, take a bite, put your fork down, chew 10 times. Bite, chew the food 10 times, swallow. Do it, rinse and repeat. Because when you eat slowly, the chemical signals from your gut, including GLP-1, which we make ourselves, need to travel from your gut to your brain. So the slower you're eating, the more time you're giving for chemical and neural signals to go from your gut to your brain to register fullness. And then as we're eating, we should be very mindful of the early signs of fullness and stop eating at those very early signs of fullness. Pack the rest up for the next day is the best advice, but it takes time to practice that. Grazing is not healthy. Eating often throughout the course of the day tends to keep our blood sugar high and cause inflammation.
How has the work that you do been influenced by the now prevalence of weight loss drugs like Ozempic, Mounjaro, and others?
So those medications are a tool, but we still need to be helping patients adopt a healthy diet to optimize the benefits. And I would say, I like to use the term micro-dosing of GLP-1 medications. There's a standard where they start you on an initial dose and they increase, right? However, I advise people to try to slow that down and change their eating habits, certainly increase exercise and strength training, and see if you can get away with the smallest dose, which will have the least side effects. And you also want to slow the weight loss down. We all store, this might sound scary, but we all store toxins in our body fat. There are toxins in the environment that we accumulate, and our liver can detoxify them and excrete them, but the liver is not 100%, right? So some of these toxins get stored in our body fat. When we lose weight and we mobilize fat, those toxins get released. So when you're losing weight fast, you're releasing these toxins and you're burdening your liver. And if you don't, you need to have a very high micronutrient density to your diet, like lots of different micronutrients, which support the liver's role in detoxifying. And not everyone does. So quick weight loss is not advisable.
Yeah, good point. So how do I know, or anybody know, when they have the correct balance of nutrients? How do you know that you're on the right track?
Yeah, it's hard to know for sure. But if you're eating a variety of foods, so we talked about 3 cups of vegetables, about, let's say, 2 cups of fruit or a little less. You're doing that palm-sized portion of protein at lunch and dinner, less at breakfast, and then filling in with grains and starches to early satiety, then you're doing a good job.
And let's talk a bit about as you age. Are there a youngster to a teenager to an adult, older adult? What changes would you recommend in terms of diet?
So children are growing, right? So they need more protein per kilogram body weight because they have to support that growth. And they need more calories typically because of that growth. As we near our 30s, we need to start thinking about slowing the progression of aging in your 30s, when you hit 30.
Wait, what?
I know.
I thought the best years were later in life, not 30.
Physiologically, we want to be slowing aging down starting in our 30s. So then you really want to start being mindful of eating and really avoiding those ultra-processed foods. But we don't want to be giving those ultra-processed foods to our kids either. So, and so, 30s, we need to be thinking of really making sure that we're eating enough to maintain a healthy weight, but not too much, right? We want to start being very mindful of our weight if we have not already been doing so, and working on increasing those vegetables and decreasing those ultra-processed foods, which increase inflammation. Once we hit our 60s and 70s, then we actually need much fewer calories because we tend to move less, although it's not obligatory. I mean, if you're still staying very active and working out, you can maintain your calorie intake, but most of us need fewer calories once we start hitting our 60s and 70s. But our nutrient needs actually can increase certain nutrients because physiologically it's harder for us to extract nutrients from our food. So we need fewer calories and the same, if not more, micronutrients. So in our 60s, we need to start eating even healthier to maintain good health.
Right. So tell me a bit about, one question I just was curious, I've always wondered, is there a time of day you should stop eating?
So literature's a little bit mixed on that. So typically the research would show within a 24-hour period, the total calories in a 24-hour period matter. And it doesn't matter so much about the distribution. However, most of us are less active in the evening, and many people just stay up late for really no good reason. And so they feel hungry, they perceive hunger, or they're bored, or they're stressed, or they're sad, and then they eat. So most of the calories we eat at night are just not physiologically necessary and just extra calories. So not eating at night after like 8 p.m. is generally not good.
That bowl of ice cream. So you mentioned about like stress or with sleep. How is that connected? Stress, sleep, any other factors connected to nutrition and your overall metabolism?
Yeah. So stress increases cortisol levels. Poor sleep is a stressor and increases cortisol levels. Cortisol levels are associated with increasing fats in our blood, storing fat in our abdominal area, and contributing to that inflammation. So stress has a negative impact on metabolism and physiology and how we use the nutrients that we eat. So and I know it's easier said than done, but managing stress and sleep are important.
Obviously two of the, health conditions that I know face a lot of Americans are around diabetes and heart disease. And that going to bring us back to the end of the conversation around red meat, which, things I've read always connected red meat to heart disease. And which is why I wonder, is there a disagreement and connection to that? What are some things in terms of the dietary part that concern you about potential for diabetes and heart disease? And are there other recommendations you have to minimize the risk?
Yeah. So the role of, animal protein on fatty like triglycerides and cholesterol is getting a little grayer, right? So, however, that being said, we simply, there are many reasons why you don't want to eat too much red meat. So more than a few times a week and in like a 3 to 4 ounce portion or that palm size piece, appropriate for your body size. Because higher amounts of animal protein, especially red meat, again, impact the gut microbiome and impact metabolites in your colon. So excess amino acids from animal protein end up in your colon. That leads to those microbes fermenting those amino acids and proteins, leading to the production of compounds that are very pro-inflammatory and unhealthy for your gut. Inflammation impacts the progression of heart disease as well as the progression of diabetes. So inflammation that starts in our gut increases inflammatory signals in our blood and systemically, right? So inflammation, I would say, is the connector between animal proteins, excess animal proteins, and heart disease and diabetes.
And one other example I hadn't shared, but I'm curious about connection between nutrition and colon cancer. Have you, because I've been reading a lot about, and very scary, that colon cancer has been appearing at much younger ages. And even the diagnostic testing used to be 50. It's now, I know if you have a family history, it changes as well. Where do you see connection points, and how much is diet connected to colon cancer?
I think it's very connected, and I think it does go back to ultra-processed foods, which impact, again, the gut microbiome, the thickness of the lining of your GI tract, that mucin layer. What we eat is what we feed our microbes, so what we eat not only determines who's there, what microbes are there, because there's hundreds of almost 1,000 different kinds that have been identified, but also what they make. So they're eating too, right? So when we eat, we either support the growth of healthy ones or not healthy ones, and then we change what they make. And so when we're not eating healthy, we lose the health-promoting microbes. We get more of the pathogenic microbes, and all microbes make more toxic compounds. And those toxic compounds are hanging out in your gut, affecting the gut lining and the colon lining. So I think it's very much related to nutrition.
So let's talk about interest in wanting to eat a healthy diet, but recognizing that comes at a cost in terms of families and affordability. How can families eat well on a budget given some of the economic circumstances facing families today?
Yeah, it is a challenge. It really is. So one of the primary recommendations I would make is commit to spending time in food preparation, right? Because you can buy foods that are lower cost. Everything is expensive now, but it takes time to make them. So, for example, potatoes, sweet potatoes, butternut squash, winter squashes, those are less expensive foods, right? Beans, yes, you can buy beans in a bag. And yes, I know it takes time. You have to put them in water the night before and then rinse that water and then boil them. But it's very doable if you plan that. For most people, I mean, there are people that are working multiple jobs or just have life stressors going on that time to food prep is really limited. But for the most part, we want to prioritize our health and our investment in food preparation and make it a social thing. So if you're a student living on campus, maybe you get a few friends together, you agree on a few recipes, people bring different ingredients, and you spend some time. I always have music going on in my kitchen, and you food prep together, and everybody leaves with a glass container of, a few different entrees. For families, start your kids very, very, very little. I would have my kids on stools at the kitchen counter, probably handling knives way too young, but washing vegetables and participating. They would go grocery shopping with me and they would ask for items and I'd be like, oh, I can't get that for you because I love you too much. That's always what I would say is I love you too much. And my youngest son would say, can you just love me a little less today? I'd be like, no, I can't do that, honey. So involving our kids and then coming home and preparing food together. Now, it does help to bulk food prep on the weekends, right? When you can spend some time, but it's a commitment of a few hours. I spend 2 hours, I'd say, on the weekends peeling and chopping. I stand at my counter and peel and chop vegetables for a very, very long time. And then I saute them or roast them and then put them in the refrigerator in glass containers. So involving your family, though, my kids would do it. My husband, we just do it together as a family. It's just built into our schedule.
So when I go to the supermarket, what aisle should I go down and not go down?
So you need to hang out in that produce aisle for a really long time. Look for what's in season, because that'll be less expensive. And then also look in the frozen food section for plain frozen vegetables. Okay. Often more economical and also less waste. So it always makes me sad when I'm trying to encourage patients to eat more vegetables and they come back next time and they're like, oh, I bought them, but then I didn't cook them and then they went bad and I just throw them out and I was so sad. It makes me sad because I hate food waste. So if you're trying to increase your vegetables, starting with frozen is good because there's less waste, but also then balancing with some in season. And you want to get a variety of different colored vegetables because the color of the vegetable is indicative of the phytonutrient that's there. So A is beta carotene, green is chlorophyll. So we want a variety of those different phytonutrients and antioxidants because they work together synergistically. So you want to get each week, try to buy 4 or 5 different colored vegetables, really mix it up, and then visit the frozen food section only for frozen vegetables that are plain, no sauces, no seasoning. Also, some frozen vegetables like berries are very common now in the frozen food section, plain, nothing added to them. So it's more economical typically. So you want to spend a lot of time in the fruit and vegetable section. And then starchy vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squashes like butternut squash or acorn squash are really good sources of starch. And then you can meander the protein section and, look for chicken. It's much more economical to buy the whole chicken and bake it. It's really not that hard. We don't recommend you wash the chicken anymore. You just carefully take it out of that package, put it right in the pan, put the pan right in the oven. You don't have to sit there in the oven with it. Just turn it on and go about your day at home. So baking a chicken is not hard. So that fish, you can buy frozen shrimp and whatever fish is on sale. Look for what's on sale.
Right. Let's talk a bit about supplements. What's your advice around taking supplements?
I really would recommend you get some professional guidance. So a multi's okay, but don't depend on it to get all of your micronutrients because, for example, there's one vitamin A in a multivitamin, but there's many different carotenoids that you're going to get from your vegetables. So it can help just balance or help be a little insurance, but you really don't want to depend on it. And then I do use other supplements for people depending on their health needs and their health condition. So, I often have people tell me, magnesium apparently is a big thing on social media right now. So everyone's taking magnesium. You may not need magnesium. And then if you're spending money on supplements and not spending that money on food, that would be a concern, right? I really want to make sure that you optimize your resources to buy food and then maybe a multi, but beyond the multi, I really would recommend you get professional guidance from a registered dietitian.
Thank you for that. With diet, as often you hear diet and exercise. What advice do you give to your clients around that balance?
Yeah, I talk a lot about exercise, but I also refer to my colleagues in physical therapy or athletic training. So when we hear about protein and the guidelines, in my opinion, really promote too much protein, and they put it in kilograms so that they're recommending 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. But because 50% of people are overweight, you really shouldn't use your whole body weight to estimate that protein, or you're going to way overdo it. And eating protein doesn't miraculously make it go to your muscle. You have to strength train in order for the dietary protein to be used to rebuild muscles stronger. So our body tissue is always breaking down and building back up. So when we are weightlifting, we're actually causing some damage to the muscle and causing a little bit of breakdown at the cellular level, at the micro level. And then those chemical signals that get released from the muscle pull in the amino acids from your food to make that muscle bigger and stronger. So you need that stimulus of strength training in order to use the dietary protein to build muscle mass. So just eating more protein is not going to put on muscle.
So interesting. So last question. What is one piece of advice you want to leave our listeners with about healthy diet?
Eat whole, minimally processed foods. So it should look recognizable to you. Food should look very close to when it looked like it was growing. Like a chicken, you can picture walking around. A chicken nugget, not so much. Vegetables, you could picture when they were growing. So minimally processed foods, plant-based, and then sprinkle on some animal sources of protein.
Well, Jo, thank you so much. I learned so much from you today, and I hope to follow your advice. We'll have to do a check-in later to make sure I'm following your guideline. And I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts, your insights, and expertise today. And we hope our listeners find these discussions informative and empowering as we navigate these times together. So again, thank you again for being our guest, and join us again for next week's episode. For now, I'm Rick Gatteau.